Hey everyone, how's it going? Welcome back to another Demystifying Post-Production Motion Monday. My name's Ellie, and for the final time this month, I'm joined with the amazing master trainers, Lionel and Dustin. How's it going, guys?
It's going great. Another
Doing great.
amazing
Good.
Monday.
Another
Yeah.
amazing Monday. Yeah, I can't believe we're already at the final week. So yeah, sorry we signed on a little bit kind of past the hour. We were just fixing some technical issues. You know how these things go sometimes. And hello to everyone in the chat as well. Hey to Hannah, to Glenn, Bruno, Bernd, Gerd, Oliver, Alberto, Ahmed, Brian, Max. Oh my God, Anders, Wesley. I've committed now. I have to go all the way through. Christian, Akim. It's nice to see you all. Thank you for joining us live as always. So before we get into what we're going to be doing today, let me just talk to you guys about, the amazing stuff that the whole Maxon collective are doing. And if you ever want to find out what's going on, any webinars, any events, all you got to do is head over to this page here, which is the maxon.net events page. And if we scroll down, you can see all the stuff that's happening over the next couple of weeks and months that is kind of like being done as a whole team here. And believe it or not, we actually have something every single day this week. So today we have our wonderful demystifying post-production. And then tomorrow, Noseman is running like a special Ask the Trainer where he's going to be talking a lot about getting certified as both an artist and a trainer inside of Cinema 4D. So you guys may be aware, over the last few weeks in the Ask the Trainer sessions, Jonas and Noseman have been diving into these certification topics and kind of breaking those down. And so this is sort of like a follow-on from that. And so if you're interested in that, it's happening at 12 noon Eastern time, which I believe is 9 a.m. PST and 5 UK time. And then on Wednesday, we have part 4 of our Hands-On with Maxon Intro to Rigging workshop. So Joe's been diving into like the fundamentals of rigging throughout that workshop. So if that's something that you're keen to learn about, then definitely head over and register for that. And you can always catch up on the YouTube channel for any of those sessions that you've missed. And then we do run so our normal Ask the Trainer is every second and fourth Thursday. We run that on YouTube Live. But because March is like a bit of a special month, we have a fifth week. And so we thought, instead of not running an Ask the Trainer, you can see we're running 2. And so on Thursday, we're doing a special Meet the Trainers where you can come and hang out with us for an hour. And we're going to talk about, all the guys are going to be talking about their paths into the industry, talking about stories, sharing some previous work. And the whole, like so many of the team are going to be on there. So it's going to be like a really cool experience. And then on Friday, as always, we have the wonderful VFX and Chill with Seth and Hashi. So feel free to go over to the events page. And then next month, we're starting a brand new demystifying topic. And so that's going to be on connecting workflows. And Lionel, I believe you are part of that, right? Do you want to talk about a little bit about what's going to be going on? Because they're not on the events page yet, but I believe this week they will be for people to register for.
Yeah, exactly. We're still working on it, and there will be one about how to create transition with Cinema 4D for After Effects. It's a nifty workflow because all the rendering will be on the spot thanks to Cineware, and we will see that Cinema 4D is very good at creating transition. And another one on very different topic on how to use light groups to create a light mixer, that is to create to turn on and off light for architectural rendering, for example. Very interesting topic also.
Cool, that sounds great. Yeah, so you guys will be able to register for those, I'm pretty sure, at least by the end of this week on this page. And again, all of our stuff gets recorded, so if you ever want to recap or catch up on any of the sessions or see which YouTube live streams are coming up, all you got to do is head over to YouTube, type in Maxon Training Team, and you'll get this lovely page here. And everything is broken down into playlists as well for our different kind of series that we run. For example, like today is our demystifying post-production, and we have all of the previous sessions that you can catch up on. So throughout this last month, we've been diving into some Redshift stuff. So weeks 1 and 2, Lionel showed us some incredible stuff at rendering particles and volumes inside of Redshift, and that was looking at kind of like native as well as X particles. And then last week, Dustin, we did a little like swap over. Me and Dustin, we swapped weeks, and he showed us some complex layering materials. So if you want to check those out, then all you got to do is head over to here. All of this stuff, these links, as well as a link for our merch store to get a free t-shirt, can be found in the handout section of GoToWebinar. All you got to do, type in the super secret password, which is Redshift Raising, and then pay for shipping, and you guys can get a lovely Maxon t-shirt, just like this stuff. And then finally, we also have some project files which can be found on the Dropbox. And what I'm going to do at the end of this session, I'll make sure that I post all my project files in a week 4 folder. So let's get into what we're going to be doing today. So let me just switch my camera off so you guys can see my screen nice and big, but I'll be back. So today I thought we would dive into subsurface scattering inside of Redshift. And so normally, you know, when we're creating materials or standard materials inside of Redshift, we look at like the interaction of light across the surface of our objects. In the real world, some objects are slightly translucent, and I've actually got some reference images here on just on Photoshop. And so as light enters the surface and gets scattered inside of our material or our object, it then exits the surface potentially at a different point. And so we can see here that, you know, we've got like skin's quite like a common one. So we can see where the light is hitting some of these areas. We're getting some more translucent areas. We've got some grapes here where you can see, especially like around the edges, we have these really kind of bright white areas. And then these slightly more kind of translucent areas in the middle where it's slightly more dense. And then we've got like some leaves and then good old gummy bears here as well. And so to reproduce this type of effect, we in Redshift or in any other kind of like CG software, we require what's called subsurface scattering. And so if we head over to Cinema 4D, we have a couple of different types. And so if I just open my material manager, I'm going to create a new Redshift material. And so this is just a standard Redshift material. And inside of here, we have 2 different types of subsurface scattering. Inside of our base properties, as we come down, we have single surface scattering. And so these are the settings down here. And this is what we're going to spend pretty much majority of today's session looking at, the different kind of attenuation units and what exactly these settings mean. And we're going to start to create some cool looking results. And then we also have multi-surface scattering. And so multi-surface scattering allows us to have multiple layers. And so what we can do is we can have multiple bounces and multiple scattering going on, and we can create more like softer, more advanced looking textures inside of here. What we also have, some of you keen-eyed people may notice that we do also have an SSS shader. This is, I would say, slightly more of an older shader, slightly more like a legacy shader, and Redshift would recommend working more in the Redshift material or inside of the skin shader. And the skin shader is a much more advanced shader. If we have a look in here, we can see that we have many more advanced settings in here. And we're not actually going to be looking at this skin shader, but I'm hoping with the information and the knowledge that we learn today, it will allow you to understand an introduction to maybe using this shader so you can dive into it yourselves or look at the Redshift documentation. So let me just get rid of that one there. Cool. So what we want to do is, before we actually look at learning subsurface scattering, there's a couple of things that I want to talk about that are very important when we're looking at building our materials inside of Redshift or building our scene. So our scene needs to be lit correctly to ensure that we have enough light traveling through our objects to enable our scattering and our absorption effects, which are the two effects of subsurface scattering. The different intensities and position of our lights is also going to result in different subsurface results. And then object size and density is also going to influence our final look. And so to demonstrate this is why I've got this. This looks like, you know, like my first Cinema 4D scene. We've got just a couple of primitive shapes. And the reason I've created this scene, and let me just move this out of the way so I can see what's going on. Let me just show you what this scene is actually made up of. So super basic, super simple. We have like our Redshift camera. We have a dome light just to create some overall lighting. We then have an area light, and our area light is positioned behind our objects, and it's casting light through them towards our camera. And this is going to be really important because this is going to help us with our subsurface scattering. And if you want to see, my intensity is set to 20 and my size is set to these sort of like nice, you know, nice round numbers down here. And we've got a couple of different primitives, and this is going to help us, because what I'm going to do, I'm going to apply the same material to them all, and we're going to see, based on the settings that we choose, what the different densities are going to make our subsurface look like. So important things to think of: lighting, and then object size and density, and our subsurface material. Those are the three things that you really need to take care of and consider when you want to start working with subsurface. And if you want to see the sizing of my objects, this is the torus, this is the cylinder, this is the platonic, and this is the other cylinder, because I think it's important to know the size of everything that I'm working in of this scene, but I'll also be able to share all this stuff afterwards. So let me just grab my render view. I like to work in a render view quite a lot, and what's nice is you do get quite a true representation when working with especially single surface scattering. Let me just kick this off, and we're going to just drop our material on each of our objects here. So let me open this up, open up my material, and let's start to work with some single surface scattering. So if we come down to here, let me just open this up. Okay, so when we're working with single surface scattering, what we want to do is we just want these settings here, at least for now, to be defining our material. I don't want anything else to be basically playing a part on my material here. So what I'm going to do, I'm actually going to switch off my diffuse, and I'm going to switch off my reflection. And so we can't really see anything, but basically what we're getting is a pure black. We're getting like a nothing material because nothing's having an effect. And as we come down to here, we can see we have a bunch of different settings with some like technical terminology. And if you guys have been part of my sessions before, you guys will know I'm not the most technical person inside of, you know, software or in life. But when it comes to learning subsurface scattering, we need to understand what some terminology means and what exactly or how much they can impact our material. And once we understand this stuff, we can then start to build our materials in an accurate way and go, okay, cool, I want to create like, you know, this nice, like we're going to create like a gummy material later, like a sweet sort of material. And so once we know what these settings do, we know what exactly we need to adjust to create that, instead of just, you know, pulling our sliders back and forth, which is, disclaimer, exactly how I learn things inside of C4D and Redshift. So there's nothing wrong with that, but this is going to be a little bit more technical to start with. So let's take a look at our attenuation units. So for a start, we have transmittance. So we have transmittance and extinction. So we'll look at transmittance first. And so what exactly is transmittance? And so this particular mode or setting allows us to define the absorption of light independent of scattering. And so what we can do, we can actually control the light attenuation and the color of our absorbed light with this setting here. And so there are three main kind of, I don't know, like terminologies or things that I think are really important to remember and to learn when understanding subsurface scattering. So the first of which is we talk about absorption and we talk about scattering quite often. And so we refer to them as absorption and scattering coefficients. So these are like the values or the amounts of these things. And so when a light ray passes through a volume, so let me just for now, so we can actually see our object so I can talk about this a little bit easier. Let me just switch my diffuse back on. So when a light ray passes through an object or a medium, it loses its intensity because of two different things, absorption and scattering. And absorption is the loss of intensity from the light ray as it travels through your medium or your object. So as our light hits our object, the amount of absorption is the amount of like lost intensity from our light. And then scattering is the light that gets redirected in random directions inside of our object, resulting in a more diffuse look. And then attenuation is basically the sum of these two effects happening. So attenuation is the sum of our light being absorbed and also being scattered. And so once we know these three things, we can start to define our subsurface by using these different values. Cool. So let's actually start to, create some subsurface scattering, right? Let's actually start to mess with some of these settings. So I'm going to leave this in transmittance mode for now. Personally, I prefer it to extinction, but we'll have a look at the two because it could be a personal preference type of thing. So transmittance is going to allow us to define our transmittance color. But first of all, what we want to do is we want to effectively enable subsurface scattering. So we want to kind of switch it on. And the way that we do that is we actually want to come down to our scatter scale. And so this is going to increase the light scattering. And so we need that, right? We need that to enable subsurface. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to kind of switch this on. So we've got a really low value here. I've got what, like 0.002, but we can already see something happening here. We can already see we're no longer getting that pure black material. So what I'm actually going to do, let's put a value of like 0.1 in here. And so we've effectively enabled our light scattering. So we've kind of switched it on. That's the way that I think about this. And so we can now see that we're having our light pass through our objects. And we can kind of see, this is where you can see how the density of your object can play a part. So I'm hoping you can see this through the feed, that because our platonic here is a great example, we're having these bright white areas here, and then we're having a slightly more grey area in here where it's a more dense material. And so this would be like the first thing that you want to do. You want to enable your scattering by increasing your scatter scale. And then the next step would be to be adjusting our transmittance color. So transmittance color does two different things. So the first thing it does is it's actually going to define the color of the light ray after it's been absorbed by our material. And so as our light is hitting our material, it is being, or some of it is being absorbed, which is why we have a slightly denser area here. And so what we can do with the transmittance color, we can say, okay, we want this light, the absorbed light, to be X color. And so let's just choose a color. I've been working with blue quite a lot. So I've chosen this blue color. And so hopefully you guys can see what we're going to do. We'll adjust some other settings to make it more visible soon. But now the light that has been more absorbed is actually now blue. But the second thing transmittance color does, so it not only allows us to color our absorbed light, but it also controls the amount of absorption or the intensity of the absorption. So absorption is, the amount of light that is getting absorbed by our object. And so what happens is the more absorption that happens, the more dense and solid our material will look. And so we can see this, if I sort of start to move this down, as we get this darker, we can see how this value also plays a part. So transmittance color is doing two things: coloring the light that's absorbed, but also determining the absorption coefficient, which is our absorption amount. So once we have this going on, how do we make this look now like more light is being absorbed, and in turn making a more dense looking material, and also getting a true representation of this color? So some people might be looking and thinking, oh, okay, like you've picked this blue color, but it's looking like really pale. And that's because we haven't got a lot of absorption going on. So our light rays are just passing straight through. And so we can increase the amount of absorption by increasing our absorption scale. And this is like our multiplier. So what we can do, if we put in a value of 0.1, so we're going to increase this, we're going to have a completely different look. Okay, so now what's happening is we've multiplied the amount of absorption that's going on, so the amount of light that is being absorbed by our material, and what we're creating is a slightly more denser and more solid looking material. And we're also then creating that much more saturated blue, because a lot more light's getting absorbed, and therefore a lot more of that color is inside of our material here. And we can go further, so we can go to 0.5, and we can see that now we're creating a much more solid looking material here. Let's go back to 0.1 while we take a look at the rest. And here now you can probably see a lot clearer that our platonic, where we're having the sort of like the thicker area, it makes it look more solid, because more light is being absorbed, because it's less likely to be traveling all the way through, in comparison to these thinner areas here, where our light rays are passing pretty much completely through it without being absorbed. And that's why we can see these different thicknesses of materials are creating a completely different look, even though they're the exact same texture. So a little bit further down, we then have our scatter coefficient. And what this does is this controls our scattering effect, or the strength of our scattering, for the individual red, green, and blue channels. And that's why it's like a color picker as opposed to like a number value. But this does different things dependent on the different mode that you're in. So because we're in transmittance mode, this value is going to affect our attenuation. Remember, our attenuation is the sum of our absorption and our scattering. And so what it does, it works like an intensity multiplier, but it also defines the color of scattered light as it travels through an object. So if I keep to just adjusting my value here, and I pull this down, we can see how it's working almost like a multiplier for our absorption and our scattering effects. So if I pull this all the way down, we can see that we're getting none, because we've got a value of 0 here. So we're getting no attenuation happening. But if we start to pull it up, we're then getting the full attenuation. I tend to keep this in kind of black to white values, but we are also able to define the color of our scattered light. So if I just sort of choose a red value here, we can see these areas where we're getting more scattered light and it's traveling through our object. We are now defining the color as well. And so we can see here that because we have much more light easily passing through our object, it's basically completely changed the color of it to this red color, because it's all scattered light, nothing's being absorbed anymore. But I found out in my kind of like last couple of weeks of diving into subsurface scattering that I prefer to use this as a intensity multiplier just for the value. But as you can see, you can, by changing the color of the scattered light, you can create more maybe like stylized results if that's the sort of thing that you're kind of interested in doing. Finally is this phase value setting. And so you might be used to phase if you work with like volumetric lighting. And so what it is it defines the direction the light scatters out of our object. So if I just sort of come down to here and do this. So remember, our light is at the back of our objects and it's passing through towards our camera, which is over here. So with our phase, if we enter a value between 0 and 1, the light is going to scatter away from the original light source, which in our case is our area light. So our area light's gonna hit our object and it's gonna scatter away from the light. And so we can start to increase this to really kind of increase the amount of light that's coming back through. And then we can do the opposite, which is kind of like a backward scattering effect, is if we enter a value between 0 and -1, the light's going to come, it's going to hit our object, so it's going to hit our materials, and it's going to then travel back towards the original light source. So we pull this down. So now we can see that that is having an effect. I'm going to put that back onto 0. Cool, so we've had a little look at what these settings do and what they mean. And now let's really quickly, before we actually look at creating a specific material, we'll look at the extinction mode or the extinction kind of attenuation units as well. And what extinction does is it's a bit more of a scientific mode, and it uses particular scientific units to control the attenuation effect for both the absorption and the scattering. And what we can do is we have a lot more control of our scattered light with this. And what you'll notice is because we changed it to extinction, we then lost transmittance color and absorption. So now we only have an extinction coefficient value. And so I found this was a little bit harder to work with. But basically what extinction coefficient does is it controls the strength of the amount of attenuation. And so it looks at both the absorption and the scattering together. And then our extinction scale allows us to then multiply these effects in this result. And so let's define a color, because it's something I do want to show you on this as well. Let me choose again my blue color. And then we just maybe increase this setting here. Okay, maybe go to 0.1. You're probably thinking, hang on a minute, this is a blue color, so we chose a blue value here. However, what we're getting is a yellow color. And that's because when our light is being scattered, because it's scattering our red, green, and blue individual channels, it's scattering so much that the light that then comes back out from the object, therefore to us, is actually the opposite color of this extinction coefficient value. So we can see that by dropping this down, selecting our color wheel, and you can do this little like 2-dot thing. And then if I select this yellow color, we're getting the opposite color coming back out of our object. One thing we can do is we can work with just black and white values here, and then we can control our scattered light accurately by defining our scatter coefficient color. So this is less, I guess it's less physically accurate, but it's potentially more user-friendly if you want to be controlling the light, the color of your scattered light. So if we sort of change this to this color, we're seeing we're getting a much more true representation now of this color on here. And so it's up to you which setting you find best. As we can see, we can create the same kind of results with both settings. It just depends what your preference is. My preference is transmittance. That's how I like to work. And so remember, if we want to create a more solid looking material, all we need to do is increase the amount of absorption that is happening. And then if we also increase our scatter scale, we can start to create some more dense looking materials versus more transparent or translucent looking materials by lowering these values. So important things to remember when working with single subsurface scattering is your materials can very easily vary in density. So we can create solid materials, and we can also create slightly more translucent materials, which we've seen here by just adjusting the absorption and the scattering values. We can also, what's great about single surface scattering, what we're going to look at in a sec, is how we can actually use it alongside our refraction inside of our Redshift material. So what we can do is we can combine these two effects to start to create some really interesting, more realistic looking materials. And that's actually what we're going to look at now. We're going to look at using refraction and having those rays bend and bounce around inside the subsurface before they exit and create some pretty cool looking textures. But before we get into that, let's leave this. Let's leave these as these are for now. Actually, let me go to that because I want to quickly show you how lighting can play a part. So we've already talked about how lighting plays a part. What I'm going to do, I'm going to come into my area light, and our intensity at the moment is set to 20, and we have this relatively large light size. And we can see here that we're getting, this is looking like a more translucent kind of material because it's slightly more dense here, but we're getting our light rays pass quite a bit through these edges here. So if we keep an eye on the render view, what I'm going to do, I'm going to reduce my intensity of my light to 5. And so now, without changing any of my material settings, we now have a very different look. We now have a more dense, almost a more solid looking material. And so this is what we mean when we say that lighting is very important. And then if we go the opposite way, we can increase our intensity even more. And so your lighting is key, as is the position of your lighting. So if we come out of here, what I'm going to do, I'm just going to adjust the position of this area light. I'm just going to sort of pull this over and maybe like rotate this slightly. And so now what we got, we have our light coming from the right hand side in towards the back, like the back right of our objects as I'm looking at it. And so now what we can see is, especially, so I'm working a lot with the platonic because I feel like it's like a really great representation of how subsurface can have an effect on different thickness materials. So we can see now on the right hand side of my platonic, we can see these much brighter and what are more translucent areas versus these slightly darker areas. And if we come in again and have a look at this reference image, I think is a really great representation of subsurface and lighting. This is a photograph of just some grapes that I found online. And so we can see that these are all grapes. They're all effectively the same. Like if we were going to recreate these, they're effectively the same material. But what's happening is, because our light source is kind of up here somewhere, the grapes that are in the direct light look completely different to the grapes that are like in the shade or aren't being kind of affected by this direct lighting. And so this is a real great kind of representation of subsurface scattering, because if we rebuilt this inside of C4D, we would get this same look, even though they'd all have the same material on. We'd have these ones that look like so much more light is passing through because we have that direct light. And that's what we mean by looking at light intensity and light position. So let me go back into here. So we've kind of exhausted this scene. So we've looked at some important things. We've looked at what our different settings do and what they mean. Because I think for me, especially like when I was learning about subsurface scattering, because I'm going to be completely honest, we all kind of know what subsurface is. Like we could all see a nice picture and be like, yeah, cool, that's some nice subsurface scattering. But I will hold my hands up that I didn't truly understand what any of this stuff actually meant. I didn't know what, scattering coefficient was, or transmittance and things like that. And so learning this stuff and understanding what scattering is, absorption is, and attenuation, now I kind of get that. And now I know, okay, I want to make like a gummy bear material. I want to make this material. Now I kind of know what I need to adjust and what I need to do to start to get this nice looking result. And that's what we're gonna do now. We're gonna dive into actually creating this material and this texture ourselves. So let me open up a gummy bear file. So this is what we have going on. So I mean, to me, it's not perfect, because I mean, like, it's never going to be perfect, is it? We can sit and tweak this stuff for hours. We've all been there. But I'm happy with how this looks in comparison to the kind of results I was getting a couple of weeks ago, or when I was first diving into subsurface scattering. I'm really happy with the stuff that I'm showing now, and I'm not going to show the stuff that I first did because it's embarrassing. So let's dive into this. So really quickly, because it's important, I think, to understand the scale of the scene and how the scene's lit. I'm going to come out my Redshift camera and we're going to just have a look at this here. As you can see, it's not, it's not the most exciting of scenes. It's not like, but it doesn't matter. It still looks cool, and so I'm happy with it. We basically got like this little table area here, which is like our floor. We then have, again, a dome light that's working to just cast some overall natural lighting. And then we have an area light, and I'm only working with the one area light. I've not done myself any favors here, but I wanted to see how good of a result I could get with just this one. And so my intensity is set to 50, and then this is the size that we have here. And then we've got our little gummy bears, and these were actually, I found them on CG Trader, and I downloaded them for free, actually. So if I just take my materials off of them, we can see what these look like. I've got our little gummy bears here, and what I did, I added a bulge to 2 of them just so they looked slightly less uniform. And then their sizing, if I drop in a default cube, so I mean, I should have really probably made them, I should have made them more accurate to real world scale. But as we can see, I didn't do that. So this is sort of their sizing. I think they're, what are they, a couple of like centimeters in size. Yeah, so they're not tiny, but they work for the scene. So yeah, that's the scene set up. So I think that's important to show. And now what we're going to do, we're basically going to build up this gummy scene based on the information and knowledge that we've just sort of learned from the previous scene. But what we're going to do, we're going to combine it with some refraction and some reflection, which is the real great benefit of working with single SSS, is that we can do that. So let me just kick this off, and I'm going to grab myself a standard material, and let me just throw this on my gummy bears, and I'm going to open this up. Okay, so again, my starting point is to remove my diffuse and remove my reflection, because I want to sort out my subsurface before I then have to worry about doing anything else. Again, I'm going to work in transmittance. Let me just be super lazy here. Don't judge me. I'm going to copy that color, ready for when I need that. And first of all, we're going to enable our scatter scale. We're going to enable our subsurface. Let me just switch this on. And what I'm going to do a value of 0.1 to start with. And this might be overkill. Actually, I know it's going to be overkill. However, I'd rather go too far and dial it down, because that was how I found that was my process for working with it. And then what I'm going to do, I'm going to define my color. So we're going to create the green gummy bear first. So let me just paste this in here. And so as we can see, we're not getting enough of this green. We're having too much light pass through here, and they're almost looking like strange little ghost bears, because there's way too much softness going on and there's way too much light passing through our gummy bears. So what I'm going to do, I'm now going to adjust my absorption scale. And so what this is going to do, this is going to, first of all, it's going to make this a lot more kind of green, a lot more saturated. And it's also going to make them look a bit more solid, which is what we need. Because at the end of the day, they're going to be real solid objects. So let me go again to 0.1. And these are now both too high for what we need. And so if we come back to our reference image, so I like to come back and forth to reference images. So as we can see, they're nice and green, but they're not like crazy saturated, because they're slightly like translucent or they're slightly refractive materials. As the light's coming in, it's going to lighten this color in general. And so because of that, we know that we want to decrease our absorption scale as well as our scattering. So let me pull this down to like 0.05. Okay, looking a little bit better. Maybe do the same with this. These may need to go down a little bit further because we're still getting too much of that softness. So if we go 0.03, so we're now creating, it looks like a solid material, but we're still getting that translucency, which is nice. And that's sort of what we're going for if we're creating this like gelatin gummy bear material. However, the problem now is, even though I'm happy with the subsurface, we're getting some of these really dark areas. We're not getting enough translucency based on subsurface scattering alone. And this is where we can now introduce refraction and use a combination of these two effects. So we can have some refraction, but then we can also have subsurface, and it's going to create a more realistic gummy material. So what I'm going to do, inside of my material here, I'm just going to increase my weight value of my refraction. And I'm just going to put it all the way to 1. And so already it's looking better. However, it's looking a little bit too glassy, and I'm hoping it can be seen through like the session thing as well. So it's looking a bit too glassy. And what we can do, we can actually control the roughness of our refraction. So we're not talking about our reflection roughness here. We're talking about the actual roughness inside of our refraction settings. And so the way that we can enable this is, all we have to do is uncheck link to reflection. Because at the moment what's happening is it's linking these settings to the settings inside of here. But we want to have 2 different lots. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to uncheck that. And my IOR, please someone correct me if this is wrong, because I couldn't find like an accurate answer to the IOR of like gelatin. I found a couple of places said it was 1.54, but if anyone by some sheer chance actually knows, then please let me know and I'll change it and make it more accurate. So I've changed my IOR, and now what I can do, because I've unchecked my link to reflection, I have opened up the ability to control my refraction roughness. And what this is going to do, this is going to keep my nice kind of refractive look, but it's going to roughen this, and so it's going to look less glassy, and then it's going to, you know, really combine with the subsurface quite nicely. So what we're going to do, I'm going to pull this up, and let's go quite far. Let's go maybe like 0.7. And so this is starting to look a little bit more like the kind of result that I'm hoping for. But what I do want to do, I'm going to decrease, I think, my scatter scale just slightly to bring some more of that green in. And then maybe even... So what you'll notice with this, with subsurface scattering, is it's a bit of like a play between all of these different settings. So even if we ignore our refraction and our reflection for now, to really define a material, it's a lot of tweaking between our transmittance color, absorption scale, and scatter scale to find the result that you're really hoping for based on the type of material that you're creating. So I'm happy with this for now. If we come back to our reference image, there's one big thing that's going to make a difference. So we've sort of done the subsurface, sort of done the refraction. We may come back and adjust those later on, but we can see here these are really like shiny and glossy and reflective. And at the moment, we don't have any of that going on. And so even though I'm quite happy with how this subsurface looks, we need to now define our reflection. We need to bring some of that back to make this look a lot more like the reference image of these gummy materials. And so for this, all I'm going to do is I'm going to up my reflection. And so already I'm thinking it's looking way more accurate. And I'm actually going to break this up slightly just by adding some roughness for my reflection. And this is going to slightly break up these values a little bit. And so I'm pretty happy with how it's looking, to be fair. So we've started off with our subsurface. So what we did, we controlled our transmittance color, which is how we're getting our nice sort of like green gummy material here. And then we controlled the amount of light absorption as well as the light scattering inside of here to create a more, you know, translucent looking material with that nice element of softness as well. But then we'd only got so far with subsurface. So we then introduced our refraction, and our refraction added that just extra element of realism, and it allowed us to then control the roughness of this as well by unchecking our link to reflection. And then finally, I then wanted to add some reflection over the top so we get that nice glossy look. And the final thing that I then did when I was working on kind of the original shot was to actually add a little bit of bump. And what bump's going to do, it's going to add some variation to our reflection and also our refraction inside of these, or on top of the surface of our little gummy bears here. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to grab good old Maxon noise, and I'm going to connect it to my output just so I can see how it's looking. And I think I went with like displace Voronoi, and then I'm going to have to scale it way down. And I'm scaling it down because remember our gummy bears are pretty small. So what do we want to go for? 0.05? I'll go for 0.01. And then all we got to do is throw it into a bump map, plug all this stuff together, plug that into our surface, and then I'm going to really have to, you know, decrease the bump map size here. 0.01, maybe 0.05, because we don't want it to be like super intense. We just want to have a little bit of this like bump on top of here. And so I'm pretty happy with how this material looks. And the good thing with this setup is because my object is the same size, or pretty much same size apart from like a little bit of the bulge on two of them, I can actually get away with using the same material and just changing the transmittance color. So if I was working with different objects, as we saw in the previous scene, and if I wanted the result to look similar, I would need to adjust my settings. But because I'm working with the same, pretty much the same object, I'm able to get away with just duplicating it. And then I'm just going to still the same colors here really quickly. Paste that in there. And then on this one, we want a red one, don't we? And then grab that. Do. And paste. Okay. And so let's throw these on here. So which one's our yellow one? That's going to be our yellow. And that's going to be our red. And so we can see we're getting a similar look. But, you know, if we were using different objects, different sizing, I would need to come back into my material and I'd probably need to tweak these settings if I wanted to create the same effect or the same kind of result inside of here. So a couple of extra things that I did want to talk about is inside of our area light. So actually, if I go back into my dome light, some people may, inside of their lighting details, control their ray contribution. So going back to, you know, talking about volumetric lighting, if you work with volumetric lighting in Redshift, you know, you create your environment and then we adjust our volume contribution setting inside of here to create and really dial in that really nice, you know, that nice look of fog. Well, ray contribution can also be important for our single scattering. And that's because what we can do is, so what I'm going to do actually, for the sakes of this, I'm going to switch off my single scattering contribution for our dome light. And so that's not made too much of a difference. It's made a little bit of a difference, especially inside of here. Then inside our area light or inside the area lights that you are using to really control your subsurface. So that's kind of what. So our dome light is just adding a little bit of like extra, like something on top. But really our area lights or area light here is what's controlling and defining our subsurface and our light kind of absorption here. If we come into our area light, we can control our single scattering. And what this is going to do is it's going to scale the intensity of the light when it's seen through a subsurface single scattered material. And so if we switch this down, we can see how big of an impact the lighting is having on our material or our single scattered material. And so what we can do, if we put it on a value of 1, if we find it's not intense enough, instead of having to just go, oh, okay, I'm going to just increase the intensity of my light, but then not be satisfied with how it's affecting everything else in your scene, instead, come into your contribution, so into your details, into your contribution, and then just increase the value here and scale up the intensity of this individual ray contribution setting. And that's what I did here. I didn't go too crazy with it. I just did like a 1.5 because I was quite happy anyway with my lighting. But this is a setting that can become very important, especially if you've got a lot of other stuff, you know, going on in your scene that you've already lit beautifully. And you don't want to worry about messing with the intensities of the overall lighting. Okay, so let's talk about, oh, actually, let me show you. So this is the render that I got out of here. So, I mean, we can all agree it's absolutely not perfect, but I'm definitely happy with how it looks, and I'm happy with, in comparison to kind of the renders that I was making a couple of weeks ago, having the understanding of how I created this material. I'm pretty satisfied with you know the combination of effects. The big thing to talk about though is because we're combining subsurface and refraction, that we are naturally going to have slightly increased render times. That's what happens when we work with transparency and we work with refraction inside of C4D and Redshift. So that is something that you will want to bear in mind. But it's unfortunately it's one of those things. So okay, let's quickly. So I'm very aware that we are drastically running out of time, but I did want to show another, like, I'll just break down this scene. So there was another scene that I created, and kind of shout out to Joey from Raw and Rendered. So this was heavily inspired. He does incredible stuff on his Instagram with Subsurface, and it was I got a lot of like great reference shots purely based on his feed, and this is where I got the idea for this. And so this is using, again, single surface scattering. So let me just quickly show you the scene again, because I think that's a really important thing to talk about when talking about subsurface scattering. So we've got good old plane with a bend here, creating this nice backdrop, and then we've got a series of tube segments, and so these are relatively big. So these are the different sizings for these. So they're all sort of like pretty big, but I just sliced them at different degrees. Again, we have an area light just shining through the back, and we have an intensity of 25, and it's relatively big. And once again, our good old dome light. And so if we open up one of these, so these are all the same material again, just with a slightly different transmittance color. And so these are the settings for this particular material, which to me looks a bit more like that soft subsurface material that you can create. And so these are the settings. We have very small scatter and absorption scales here. Transmittance color again is just defining our color, and then we have some refraction. So we have no reflection on this, but we do have refraction weight and roughness values of 1. And so if I remove my roughness value, you can see how we lose some of that softness. So what this roughness is doing is it's really kind of softening that inside look in here. And then if we remove our refraction, we have a very different look, especially in the areas where our light is less intense. So we can see these areas up here look pretty similar, like up in here. But this was the settings for this particular series of materials here, and this was how this rendered out. And I think this is quite like a nice, when we think of like that soft subsurface smooth texture. But what I will say about that particular one is I did increase my render settings quite a bit. So I think these are these default? Okay, no, so it has got the settings on. So I increased my GI to these settings, increased my bounces as well as my rays. And then the big one was my adaptive error threshold. We had quite a low value here, and this was to prevent any of the noise and the grain that I was seeing with a slightly higher threshold. So yeah, I wanted to talk about how render times and adaptive error threshold is if you're looking to get clean results and you're not too fussed about render times, I would definitely just lower this value. And I think it was even, so it was the very high basic mode preset here. But as we can see, it creates quite a nice, almost noise-free looking result. Okay. So, are there any questions on anything? I'm very aware that we're over time. Any
Yes.
questions from anyone?
Yeah, there's some question. Someone was asking what is your computer, the specific of your computer for the render, the material and so on?
Oh, so let me show you. So it's not, I haven't got like a crazy machine. It's just like an Intel iMac with a Radeon Pro 5700 XT. That's what I'm working on currently.
Nice.
Yeah, so that's the machine that I'm on.
And yeah, there was another question, interesting question about is there a reference somewhere that tells us real-world SSS settings? I don't think so, but maybe you guys know something about that.
Ooh.
I don't actually. I was trying to look this up to see if there was anything as far as reference sheets go.
Yeah, so when I was kind of trying to trying to learn and understand this, I looked less into subsurface scattering and more into scatter coefficient information, um, absorption based on light, and attenuation based on light. That's how I learned this stuff. So instead of searching about, oh, like stuff about subsurface scattering, personally I would search those particular things with regards to lighting, because that's kind of what subsurface is. It's the impact and the effect of light on your materials and your objects. And so if you want to learn more about that, yeah, I would just Google like scattering coefficients for light or attenuation for light, and that's where I got my information from. And it really helped me to be like, oh, actually, okay, I kind of get this now, by understanding about the light being absorbed. And the more the light is absorbed, the more solid and dense our material is going to be. But maybe I can try and find some of those same websites that I was looking on and some of that same information. It's super technical, but I mean, if I can learn it, I'm pretty sure anyone else here can. Okay, so let me come back on screen. Hey, everybody. So I know that was a little bit more technical than normally I would go into, but I think it's a really interesting topic, and I think the results you can create, so like these two here as an example, I think are really quite cool, really quite nice. And it's something that I'd not been able to really create before. And what I'm gonna do, I'll pack these up and I'll put them on the Dropbox for you guys to break down. But the main thing to think about is the lighting and the object size. So you wouldn't necessarily just be able to take this same gummy material, throw it on an existing scene that you have, and then get the exact same result. That is very unlikely, which can be a little bit frustrating. But now you sort of understand, or now hopefully we understand what the settings mean and what the parameters do. You can take this material, put it on there, and adjust it based on the objects that you have and the effect that you're sort of looking for. So hopefully it can be at least a good starting point and a good starting position. But yeah, I hope.
Yeah, it was good.
It was very, very clear, very well explained.
Cool. I'm glad it was good for everyone. So yeah, sorry, we do love to run over, because that's just what we do now, isn't it, guys?
You're at 6 minutes, Elly. You're doing fine.
I know. Yeah, this is probably like the least I've ever run over. But
Yeah.
if I start, then so I was debating going into multi-SSS, but then we'll be here for a whole nother hour. So maybe I'll just save that, because multi-SSS basically is we can create really nice soft looking results even by just using one different layer, because the bounces inside are just there are more bounces and multiple bounces that occur, so you create softer results. But this is more for opaque materials, so you wouldn't be including this with refraction like we do with single surface scattering. But maybe it's something we can dive into in another session, I reckon.
Yeah, good stuff.
Cool. So finally, before we kind of like say bye, don't forget, ask the trainer tomorrow with Noseman if you're interested in getting certified as either a trainer or an artist for C4D. Head over to there. That's actually going to be on Zoom. It's not going to be on our YouTube. And then we also have, our Meet the Trainers, Ask Trainer here. And if you ever want to catch up on anything, or you want to recap this session or any of the previous stuff that Dustin and Lionel has been doing this month, then all you've got to do is head over to the Maxon Training Team YouTube channel. And then last but not least, I will package up those two scenes, the segment scene and the gummy bear scene. I'll make sure I can share the gummy bear. If not, I'll just replace it with some, I don't know, strange looking object, so you guys still have the material. But yeah, it's been a pleasure, guys. Dustin and Lionel, it's been so much fun being on this whole like Redshift series with you guys. It's been
Yeah,
so
it's
much fun.
it feels like we just started and we're coming to a close on this on this series.
It does, doesn't it? I know. It goes like the weeks go so quickly, but it's been so great. Like the stuff that you guys showed was, as you can see by everyone's comments, was just awesome. And it was just it's been a lot of fun. But I'm sure, this won't be the last time we all see each other. I'm sure.
No, we have plans.
And
we'll keep
yeah,
that secret.
Always.
Cool. And thank you to everyone who was watching this live and for any questions that you guys have been doing as well. And hope you have a lovely rest of your week. And yeah, we'll all catch you on, I'm sure, another session soon.
Awesome.
Cool.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.